All right. Well, a warm welcome to everyone. My name is Adam Hems, and you are watching the Houston Azure User Group June 2021 edition. Thank you all. I'm just going to stop presenting for a second, ready for our next participant. So yes, a warm welcome. Thank you all for being here. So for those, there are some new members. So I'll just say a little bit about what the group is and what we're trying to do here before we launch into tonight's presentation / discussion, because it often is, or at least some of the best talks are, in my experience. So what we're about is a focus on community. So it is, I've been doing public cloud since, 2007. I got my AWS account, which I still have. I was at the launch of Azure in 2010, been doing it full time since 2013. And through that time, I've seen many customer cloud journeys, including being a customer of Azure and AWS myself for a couple of years. And of course, the technology, although it has changes, of course, but is the same no matter really the company or individual or team or applications or whatever area of focus you might come in remains the same for everybody. And so the customer, the journey of more going from, or the change going from traditional on-prem and traditional applications, if you're a developer, is very much the same for people in the similar roles, even though at different customers. And so I've learned that learning about similar pains using the same technologies from companies in different areas and businesses is just is valuable. It's interesting, it's reassuring in some places, and it's also just good to learn and see what others are doing. Good to see, if you're in a small company, interesting to learn what the larger enterprises are doing. They have interesting and different problems to those of us in smaller companies, and vice versa. What are all the smaller companies getting up to? How are they using the cloud in order to innovate? Companies that focus more specifically on software, so building SaaS solutions, for example, are different from companies who are doing a data center exit strategy, or maybe more innovation, leveraging some of the other aspects of the cloud, data and AI, things like that, to enhance and grow their business, provide services that they couldn't easily do before. And everyone has an interesting story, in my experience. And so the purpose of this group is to help us bring the folks and our stories, or at least encourage hearing about our stories. Now, it's kind of difficult in the virtual world, so that's why we've just had a little coffee hour, a little chat, meet and greet before we begin the presentation and the recording here. So that I think helps. It's better than nothing, which obviously none of us want. Hopefully, we'll be able to get back to our in-person meetings at some point, perhaps the back end of this year in 2021. We usually meet up, but not always. But we've usually met up in the Microsoft office. Lots of space there, lots of room, and central for most peaks. People are here in the Houston area, although we have had people drive in from Dallas and from Austin before. Not the presenters, they've flown in from Redmond and other parts of the country, but people have driven in from other cities in order to attend because they find some value in that sense of community. So that's what we're about. What we're not about is a sales pitch. This is not a place to hear the pitch and the value props and those kinds of things. So there are plenty of other places for that. That's not what we're about. It's about learning from the expertise of the presenter, and what we also try to encourage is learning by discussion with the presenter. Again, I tried earlier on doing the team live stream thing with a little interaction by text, because people, it takes a little while to learn the virtual world and how to operate in that world. But we've been doing COVID for so long, I think everyone's had a chance to really learn how to participate well in these kinds of environments. And now we're doing a full team, so everyone can, as you can see, many choose to share their cameras and chat if they wish, and everyone can join in and chat on the chat of the meeting, which will be encouraged and welcome. So with that, let me hand over to our presenter. This is a very popular topic in the customers that I've worked with, and I realized I didn't mention that my day job is a cloud solution architect at Microsoft, and I have a number of my colleagues here, and this is really a hobby for me, if you will. And so Scott, also a colleague of mine at Microsoft, he has graciously agreed to be press ganged into participating. He was great about it. It was great. I asked him, and he was very keen to join and speak about a topic that is of much of interest to everyone. Automation, a key aspect to the success of using Azure, in my experience, and this particular one key to achieving it. Without further ado, Scott, over to you, sir.
All right, very well. Thanks, Adam. Thanks everyone for being here. So really the plan today is just kind of to go quickly over infrastructure as code in general, kind of give a quick overview of that, kind of why are we doing it and what is it, and then we'll dive in more specifically to Bicep. All right, so what is infrastructure as code? So it's declarative in terms of you're specifying typically what you want, what's the end target state that you're trying to go to. There's an idea of idempotency, which is basically saying you can rerun the automation again and again to get to that same desired state. Basically, it's immutable. That one's kind of a little bit controversial. Not everybody follows that exactly, but basically the idea is you don't go modifying these resources after you deploy them. If you need to modify them, you modify the pipeline and you redeploy through the code. So reusable, modular, those kind of go together, where you basically, are building modules of automation that you can then compose into bigger projects and then reuse that whole pipeline. And then drift correction is basically saying if somebody makes a change out in the field and didn't go through your automation, then it should have a way of correcting itself, and we have that. And these are some reasons for doing infrastructure as code. So, you want that single source of truth. Like, how is this environment meant to be configured? Well, you go look in the source code repository and you see what's intended to be deployed. Repeatability and testing. So basically, you want to be able to quickly spin up a new environment, a dev environment, a test environment, a production environment, and have them be identical so that you're not having to troubleshoot kind of one-off problems that only occurred because you did something a little bit differently. Decrease provisioning time, rely less on availability of resources to perform tasks. So that's basically saying you don't want to have that one guy in the company that's the one guy that you have to go to get something deployed. You're trying to democratize this and make it available to more people. And by setting up these processes and automation, more people can kick off those processes. You can even tie it into kind of a ticketing system where people can submit a ticket, and then in the back end, it would kick off a process like this. Gone through some of those: repeatability testing, faster provision. The versioning is very important also, because basically if you're doing this with source control, as you check in changes, you'll be able to go back through the history and see who changed what aspect and when they changed it. So that history aspect is really nice. And then the documentation aspect, in the sense that you can go look in the source code and see what the definition of what was intended to be deployed, and know that that's the way things are meant to be. So this is kind of drilling into that idea of the imperative versus declarative. So if you were to write some of this logic to do a big deployment in PowerShell, you would have something that looks something like over here on the left, where you have, okay, does the resource group exist? If not, then create the resource group. Does the storage account exist? If not, then go create the storage account. And so you have all these conditional statements, and you're always checking to see if things exist. You're doing error handling to see, and then what about retries, those types of things. So there's a whole decision tree that you're building up in code when you start trying to do this in code. Now, I will say that some of these statements, like Azure CLI, actually has a little bit of idempotence, where a number of the commands, if you run them twice in a row, they don't necessarily fail. Like if that resource group already exists and you run the command to create the resource group again, it won't fail. But there's some limitations of how far you can go with that. Whereas this declarative approach, is basically saying, hey, I want a VM. I want it to be connected to a storage account. I want, this NIC on it, and the NIC should be named this. I want a public IP on there, and I want to be attached to this virtual network. So you're describing how you want the end state to be. And then when you deploy that, it does the smarts to figure out how to make that so, and if there's one part that got deleted, it restores that one part and so forth. And these are, all Bicep, Azure ARM templates, and Terraform and some others all have this capability. And then this is kind of drilling into that idea a little further. Okay, so we have a number of infrastructure as code type things. I just mentioned some of those: Bicep, Pulumi, Farmer. Those are all infrastructure as code. There's this other idea is configuration in code. And those are things like Ansible, Chef, Puppet, and DSC, which is desired state configuration. Those are all about, how you go configure the resources once they're deployed. So if you need to go deploy a VM, that's more of, something you would do with Bicep. If you need to go stand up the web server inside the VM, or, install certificates on the VM, or format the hard drive, those are usually something you would do with configuration and code as code tools. Now, there are some kind of overlaps because you can kind of kick off, for example, some DSC via these other methods. But in general, when we're talking about infrastructure as code, we're talking about these things up top here. So as far as Azure goes, there are a number of things that integrate with ARM and Bicep. So, Azure Resource Manager is ARM. And so that's kind of Azure Resource Manager is really the whole set of APIs that are used to provision resources in Azure. And then ARM templates are these kind of JSON templates that you can use to deploy. And we've had those for years. They work really well. It's just that there's a bit of a steep learning curve, and people are looking for something a little bit more friendly to get started with. And that's where Bicep is coming in. But there are a number of capabilities that kind of use a lot of these same techniques. So these same techniques that work with ARM and Bicep also tie into Azure policy, and particularly these deploy if not exist style policies. So Azure policy has several different types of policies. There's an audit policy. So you could write a policy that says, if someone deploys a VM with a public IP, audit that. Another type of policy you could say, if somebody deploys a VM with a public IP, deny that. But there's another one that says, if someone deploys a VM, go ahead and install this antivirus VM extension on the VM. So that would be a deploy if not exist. So it'd be looking to see if that extension exists or that feature exists. And if it not, it would deploy it. And the way it deploys it is through ARM. Azure Blueprints is something that kind of ties into ARM templates as well. Azure Blueprints gives you the capability of being able to deploy ARM, in which the ARM templates are basically deploying the resources to Azure. But at the same time, you can also bundle up deploying RBAC, roles about who has what permissions, and you can also deploy Azure policies. So it's really a bundling of a number of these ideas, but that's something that you can't really use one of these third-party tools as easily to accomplish because it ties in directly to ARM. Azure Template Specs is another capability where you can. Okay. So Azure Template Specs is a way that you can store templates in Azure and then make them available to other people in your organization to deploy. And another idea is this Azure Template Export, where you can go to any resource or any resource group in Azure and just say export template, and it will download the ARM template for deploying that whole resource group of resources, or that one resource. So those round trip capabilities are really important, and that may be a reason why you may choose to at least supplement your deployment with things like ARM and Bicep. So this is more about the Bicep now. This is kind of the goals of the project. This is from the team that built it. It says, we want our customers experiencing Azure for the first time or using Azure as their primary cloud to have the best deployment experience. We believe simplifying the existing language will help many of our customers deploy at scale and have a great experience on Azure. So basically what they're saying is they already have ARM. They want to make that a better, more easy to learn, more flexible language. They don't have the opportunity to start from scratch because ARM is so much built into what we do that this Bicep is really just kind of, you think of it as kind of the next generation ARM. And these are some of their goals for developing Bicep. Okay, so best possible language for validating deploying infrastructure to Azure, provides a transparent abstraction for the underlying platform. This is a super important one right here. Support for Azure resources from day one without a need for onboarding. So basically, if some team in Microsoft develops some new capability in Azure, some new resource type, they're going to publish that, and it will be a part of ARM, of Azure Resource Manager. And as a result, it will be a part of Bicep on day one. So even if it's a preview that hasn't been fully released to the public yet, sometimes you'll be able to be a part of a public preview or a private preview. Even then, Bicep will work, where if you are relying on third-party tools, it will take a while for those capabilities to be integrated into those tools. So easy to understand, straightforward to learn, the ability to modularize and reuse the code. So this is where ARM templates had an idea of modularization, but it was very difficult to use. And, as a result, people didn't use it as often as they probably should have. So this is where Bicep really does a great job of improving that situation. And first-class tooling support from the start. A lot of times with new technologies, you'll be working at the command line with no user interface or anything to look at, and it's a pretty raw experience at first. And with Bicep, they've really done a great job of integrating VS Code and the language support inside of VS Code. So here's some things they were not trying to accomplish: is to build a general purpose language to meet any need. So you still may need to use some other scripts or things to do certain things, and that's okay. And then also, to support non-Azure related tasks. So it's not meant to be a competition such that this would be taking over the world and being deployed for, to other clouds or anything like that. This is an Azure specific language, and it's really optimized for that purpose. Okay, and so this is more of a dive of, okay, what does it look like? So we talked about Azure Resource Manager is kind of the set of APIs, and through those set of APIs, you can deploy things like Azure Storage, the VMs, the compute, this identity, all of these things, right? Kubernetes, Azure Arc. Okay, and then you can use many things to deploy against Azure Resource Manager. PowerShell works against Azure Resource Manager. The Azure CLI works across Azure Resource Manager, Azure Portal, and so forth. And then ARM templates. Okay, so ARM templates, when you push those to Azure Resource Manager, you would use this command AZ deployment group create, and it would create a resource group in Azure. With Bicep, it's kind of a layer above this. Now, you can use the same command, AZ deployment group create, and it gets deployed to Azure Resource Manager, just like ARM would. You could also, if you wanted to see that intermediate language, the ARM template, you can actually do a command called bicep build, which will build an ARM template, and then you can then take and deploy that ARM template if you wanted to. So either way, there's no reason necessarily you have to do this intermediate step, but if you have a case where you need that ARM template for some reason, you can do that. So some things to know about Bicep is it transpiles to ARM's templates. That's what this step is referring to. It's modular, it's open source, day one supports these other services that we mentioned. No state files to manage. So this is one of the things where a number of the tools in this area often have a state file that keeps track of what's been deployed in the past, and so that they know when you go to make a change, what it's going to change, right? And so, and there's not necessarily anything wrong with that. It's just that, it's an extra thing to set up, and then it's also an extra thing to secure. So a lot of times when you go to deploy something and you provide secrets with that deployment, a number of those tools will log those secrets into that state file. So then now you need to be responsible for making sure that state file is really maintained securely. So with Bicep, it's not using a state file. Basically, what it's doing is when it goes to do a deployment, if you want to see what's changed, it's going to go query what is in Azure now and compare that with what it's about to deploy, and then show the difference. And Azure Bicep is currently at the 0.4 release, which when it reached 0.3, it became fully supported in Azure. So you could call in if you have a support contract, you can get tech support for it. And at that point, they also reached feature parity with ARM templates.
So Scott,
Yes.
Andrew in Perth, Australia, I think.
Okay.
Andrew had a question. I assume 0.4 version means that there is a likelihood of breaking changes in the language / syntax prior to a 1.0 release.
It's possible, but that they really they were saying that back when they were in kind of the 0.2 range. They were saying, "Hey, this is a free for all." Now that they're at 0.4, it's pretty stable. So yes, you're right. It could. I'll show you an example later where there's some places where they really try to avoid having lots of commas throughout the code, but there's one place where a comma might make things more convenient, and they're kind of debating that. And you can go look on the open issues. You can go see it. It's all in the public. But they're really trying hard not to break anything. At the same time, there's a chance that maybe the right answer would be to require commas in this specific case. So, that's an example of something that might require a breaking change if they decided to go that way, but they're kind of weighing the benefits of that change versus otherwise. So now the deal is, if you deploy this to ARM, that ARM template is going to continue to deploy. Like if you compile that to that intermediate ARM template and deploy that, you would still have that ARM template. And then even if they make the breaking change, I can show you the UI support for it is very nice. So.
Okay, thank you. A couple other questions you may wish to address now or later.
Sure.
From Barat, how does it compare to Terraform? And McKenna also asks, hey McKenna, how does it compare to Pulumi?
Yeah, so Pulumi and Terraform. So Pulumi is really for people that like writing something that looks more like code. So we'll get into it in a second, but Bicep is still something that really kind of more describes what the state should look like and doesn't feel like a programming language. Pulumi definitely feels like a programming language. So if you like that, if the team is mostly developers, that might be a good fit. If your team is more widespread and you're going to have kind of developer people, but also infrastructure people, probably something like Bicep or Terraform would probably be a better choice. As far as the look, Bicep and Terraform look very similar. So it's a very similar idea. A lot of the capabilities that Bicep brought to the table, Terraform brought to the table, which were things like being able to reference other objects you created in your other objects. So I'll show you what that looks like later, but that capability is in both. So Terraform does have the state file we mentioned. Terraform is cross-cloud to some degree. Now, when I was originally told that, I was thinking you could take Terraform that you wrote to, say, deploy a VM, and then take that same Terraform and deploy it somewhere else in some other cloud to deploy a VM. And that's not quite exactly what happens. You're using the same kind of language, but every cloud would have a different implementation that you would go program differently. So it's not a one size fits all regardless. But Terraform does have the cross cloud capability. As you'll see, Bicep, one of those things that it brings to the table is this integration with the other services like Azure Policy, Blueprints, being able to take things that came as downloads from the Azure Portal and re-uploading to the Azure Portal and so forth. So it's a trade-off, and that's kind of why we're not really picking sides here. We're offering this as another option.
Okay, thanks, Scott.
Anything else?
Not just yet, but thanks everyone for posting your questions in the chat. Keep doing that.
All right, so this got stopped. Okay, so yeah, I'm using this is a GitHub code space, by the way. It basically, when you check out the code, it will basically automatically configure sort of a container for you to run your code in the background.
You're one of the lucky folks in the private preview.
Yeah, exactly. All right,
okay, so inside of view for everyone. Excellent. Yeah. So all browser based.
Yep. No, well, this is actually running VS Code. So it's connecting to that container from Visual Studio Code. And so that's one of the things that's really great about Bicep is the VS Code support it has. To use that, there's a VS Code extension that Bicep extension. Really makes that nice. Of course, I also have the Azure Resource Manager template from ARM templates. And here's my GitHub code spaces. All right, so let's start with a new file. So that's our Bicep file. I'm just calling it main. And then to get started, everything you're creating is a resource. So I'm going to say resource. And then I'm going to give it a symbolic name. This is kind of how I'll refer to this thing I'm creating later. So this is going to be a storage account. So I'm just going to call it STG. And then you'll see it prompts me for all the different types of resources. Now you'll see these different things here, this thing that becomes before the slash. These are all called resource providers in Azure. And it's kind of an important thing to understand is that you can see Microsoft authorization, Microsoft batch, all these different services, right? But the way this works is that different teams can contribute to Azure. It's not one single team building Azure. So the compute team is going to build the compute resource provider, and the storage team is going to build the storage resource provider. And in your code, you're kind of stringing these all together. But just understand that all of these can be released to Azure independently, and then the Azure Portal just builds on top of these underlying APIs. So I'm going to do storage counts, and then it prompts me for what schema I want to use. And so there's different version schemas that change over time. I usually just grab the most recent one, and to do that, I just hit tab, and it automatically fills that in. And then I say equal. And then there are a couple different ways I can do this. I'm going to hit open parentheses, and I could just hit this, and it will tell me, oh, you should have added skew and kind and length. So it'll tell me what's missing. There's another way, and I'm hoping that is this required properties. Okay, and this is really slick. This just came out. So this is basically a scaffolding capability. So if I just hit tab right there on that, it'll fill in all the stuff for me and kind of build out this template. So it's pretty slick to use, even in such an early release. So now my name for my storage account, storage account names all need to be all lowercase. And I don't even think you can use any special characters. So I'm going to say STG Scott 1. Okay, so that's my now you can see I've got some underlines there, right? Almost everything in here, if you're not referring to an object or another variable, you need to have single quotes around it. So, and I don't think there's anywhere you use double quotes. So the answer is always single quotes if you mean to supply value. And my location, I'll say East US. There's any number of Azure regions you could use there. You can mouse over this and it'll tell you some more about it. Which SKU do you want to use? I can hit Control Space and it'll give me this nice list. I can also just mouse over and do the same thing, right? So I'm going to go for standard locally redundant storage. And then kind. I'm going to go with storage v2. Okay. Now this right here is enough that I could deploy this to Azure and create a storage account. So let's go ahead and do that. So the command for doing that is the same command you would use to deploy an ARM template, which is AZ. That's the Azure CLI. So they always begin with that. Deployment. So we're creating a deployment. And you have different kinds of deployments. You can deploy at a resource group level or a subscription level, and even a management group level. So right now, this deployment's for a resource group. So it's just called group, then create. And then I have to tell it what file I want to deploy. So -F. And then now the slash will be different depending on whether or not you're doing Linux or Windows. And then the other thing I need to do is tell it what resource group to deploy to. And I did already pre-create some resource groups, so I'm just going to deploy to one of those. So it's called Bicep -dev. Okay. Pull up my. All right, so I'm in my Bicep dev. Let's see if it. You can still see it's running, so I really shouldn't expect anything yet.
But it's running in your code spaces, right, Scott?
Yes, yes.
Not locally exactly. On your devices.
Correct. Yeah, but it would be the same. Even if I were running this directly on, I don't need code spaces to do this. I could just as well do this in PowerShell. If you use WSL, Windows Subsystem for Linux, you can do it that way. So I've got about 5 different ways I could do this. But yeah, it's straight on. If the most basic thing to do would just be, hey, I'm going to go install the Azure CLI and PowerShell and just use it straight from there. And all of them work fine. This is a case that doesn't even matter. The other, if you're not familiar, you could use Cloud Shell. I wouldn't necessarily use that because you really want to use VS Code here. Okay, so it deployed. It told me it succeeded right there, right? So we're going to go take a look at that.
You can use code in Cloud Shell for those who are keen.
You can. It's not going to have that extension, though.
Good point. Good point.
Yeah. You're right, though. So it's going to take a second for it to show up in the portal. There it is. Okay. There's our storage account in East US, just like we expected. Use the name we expected and so forth, right? And then this is locally redundant storage, the LRS that we specified, okay? So let's go back. I want to show you how we make some changes. So one thing we might do is, what if we wanted to use geo-redundant storage, okay? So I can just make a change to this. And then, some people worry, particularly when you're using DevOps, they're like, oh, you're going to deploy that again? That's going to create another storage account, but it doesn't. Like, you make a change. And in fact, I can do the -C here for confirm, and it's going to actually show me what changes it's going to make. So that's the whole idempotencies thing, is we ought to be able to deploy this over and over and over and not be concerned that we're going to break something. So yeah, so there it is. So it has kind of a legend here that's telling me that the tilde, purple tilde, means modify. So if I go look at, there's my storage account, and you can see it's going to take LRS and change it to GRS. And this is one of the big advantages that originally Terraform had that and ARM didn't. And then eventually ARM added this capability. And then now Bicep comes along and it more or less just inherits this capability. So, all right. So do you want to execute the deployment? Actually, I'm going to say no. I'm going to say no right now. I've got a couple other things I want to do before I do that. Okay. So one thing we could do to make this really more reusable is to start adding some parameters so that we can kind of pass in. Maybe I'm going to deploy these storage accounts to different environments, and I want to treat things differently for different environments. So I might pass in a variable called environment that's used in this template. So the way you pass in information to the template when you deploy it is this parameter. Then I give the parameter a name. So I'm going to say environment. Then you tell it what kind. Okay, so I have an array, bool, integer, object, or string. I'm going to go with string. And then if I want, I can even give it, if I just left it right there, it would still work as, it would work as a parameter. And it would be a required parameter. You would have to pass something in. If I do this, dev, okay, that's basically setting a default value. So it's not going to be bugging me for a parameter. Now, what I can do with that is I can then concatenate that onto my name. They call it string interpolation in Bicep. So basically what you do is you put $, curly brace, and then in between the curly brace, you put your variable name that you want to evaluate. And so basically what that's going to do is just tag that dev onto the end of my name, okay? Now, if I deploy this again, keep in mind that I've changed the name. So what's going to happen is it's going to deploy another resource group. So, I mean, another storage account. So let's do that. I'm not going to do the confirm this time. I'm just going to go, actually, no, I will. Let's go ahead and do that.
And Kuong has a question, got his hand raised when you get a minute, Scott.
Good timing, yeah. Always good to ask a question when I'm just hit deploy. What's the question? Can you read it out?
He's got his hand raised. Kuang, you want to come off mic and just say it, or you can type it in the chat, mate?
That's fine.
Sure. Yeah, so I would just have a question for Scott. So when you declare a parameters like that, So at the moment, right, in the ARM template, I cannot pass. If you try to reference like an external resource, it cannot be done when you declare, or when you pass, or when you put in the ARM template at the moment, right? You can use a reference function to actually reference an external resource, but not within the property of a resource, but it cannot be done as a value to a parameter to the ARM template. Does that problem carry over to the Bicep as well?
I'm not sure if I follow you. I think you can pass in
basically,
parameters.
No, so I guess the parameter value would be so in the ARM templates, right? In ARM template, what we're trying to do is we're trying to reference an external, like a source account access key, right? And I can only do that within the property of the resource within an ARM template, but I cannot use a reference function as a value of a parameter.
Okay, yeah.
Or I cannot.
I think, yeah, I'll show you this in a minute.
I think. Right, or even in the variables as a variable within the ARM template. And that's kind of like a big problem for me right now, to be honest.
Okay, so yeah, the way you solve that, and I think you can use the same approach in ARM, is you basically just have output values from your child templates. And I'll show that in a minute if that answers your question. Okay, so we got that deployed. Remember, we added a new name, so it should have deployed a second storage account. Let's go take a look and see if it's there. I hit refresh here.
Really wants to build the suspense today.
Exactly. It's not that big a deal that we see this, but I mean, we did see that it deployed. So yeah, occasionally the portal is a little bit, there's a little delay. Let me make sure that it went with a different name. Oh, I know what I did. See that black dot right there? That means that you have work that you have not saved. So Control S, save it. So unfortunately, that deployment did not even take. But that's a good example of idempotency, because basically
good learning.
I deployed again and it deployed the same thing.
And also, and you're still doing -c, right? So it will confirm before you can move ahead, right? Yeah.
Yep. And all that plus green is basically showing it's going to add a second storage account. And then the ignore here is basically this existing storage account that's already there.
Andrew's asking what the -c is about.
Yeah, that's a confirm. And basically, it's going to confirm, it's going to ask you this question: are you sure you want to execute the deployment? And mostly the reason I'm doing that is because it also does the what if, which is showing me the delta of what's going to get deployed. If I didn't have the -c, it would just plain deploy it. Now, if you want just the what if and not the not going to deploy it all, you can, instead of doing -c, instead of create here, you can do what if like that, and it would just do the what if. Okay.
Both of which would have avoided the issue of an unsaved file a little earlier.
Yeah. All right. So, so that deployed. We can go take a look. Should be there. Not that. All right, and there's our second storage account. And remember, we tagged on dev to the end. Okay. All right, so let's keep going and improving this. Another thing that's pretty common that you might want to do is, instead of like hard coding your region, a lot of times you're going to be deploying those resources to a resource group. And a pretty common practice is just to grab the region of the resource group you're deploying to, and kind of make the assumption that when I deploy to a resource group in East US, then I'm going to want to deploy those resources in East US. It's not always true, but you can simplify your deployment if you do that. So the way you might do that is to use a function here, and it's called resource group. So I can do resource group and do just like that, dot location. And then the same idea is used in ARM. Another thing I might do is, let's say I want to do LRS, which is locally redundant storage, when I'm in kind of my dev and test environments. But if I deploy to production, I want geo redundant storage, which will like sync my storage to another region as well. So I can put some conditional statements in here for the deployment by doing that. So what I can do is I can say environment equal prod. I'm going to explain a little bit more about this in a second. I'll do question mark. Standard RS. And I'm putting a colon between these. And so let me go through these. So if you've done a lot of programming languages using this exact same approach, this is familiar to a lot of people, but this first part is my if. So this is basically an if then else. So if the environment, which is this parameter up here, equals prod, then I want to return the string standard GRS. Otherwise, I'm going to return the string standard LRS. Okay, that's how that works. And then to stop people from like passing in the wrong parameters here, I can do something here called allowed. And then this is going to be the array of allowed values. And when you do an array in Bicep, you do the square bracket. And this is what I was telling you earlier, where there's, you might think that you want to do all my arrays, like might want to do like dev, test, and prod all in one line. That's not currently supported. And that's what I was saying, where maybe a comma might make things better. Not really sure. But right now that's not supported. So way you tell it these things is by putting them on their own line. Okay, so that's my list of allowed values. And that's really this allowed is modifying this parameter and saying this parameter can only accept one of these three values. All right. So let's see what else. Another thing I might want to do here is to add tags. So a lot of times when we're deploying, we need to pass the cost back to different business units within our organization. And you can do that by deploying to different different subscriptions or even different resource groups. There is a breakout on the bill by resource group, but a lot of times people want to get more granular and so forth. And so this is a way, tagging is another way on the bills to be able to break things out and understand. There are also many other reasons why you might want to tag. So what I'm going to do here is create a variable. And a variable is just like a parameter, but you're not passing it in. It's basically kind of, a lot of times what you do for a variable is you're kind of taking a parameter and maybe appending something to it to create this other internal value that could be used. So I'm going to call this billing tags. And notice that I don't really have to do a type here. Like I don't say string. For variables, it basically just looks at the type of value you're using and assigns itself to that type. So the billing. So for this, I might say something like bill code, then give whatever the something like that. Then I might say department. And I could say this is for the HR department. Only single. Okay. And then for back on my resource, I can then just say tags. And then I can just use that billing tags, stick it on there. Now I could have just done where I just put this curly brace. Could have done, let me see. So start typing bill code right here, just like this, and not have to do this whole separate variable. But the beauty of doing this approach is then if I created like 5 or 6 resources in here, I could stick that same set of tags on all of them. So that's why you might want to do it that way. All right, so let's deploy this again. Saved. Not going to confirm. I'm just going to deploy it.
Okay, we've got some questions lined up for you, Scott. Do you always have to run this via the Azure CLA, or can you use PowerShell?
You can certainly use PowerShell, yes. I've just chosen Azure CLI. I think the syntax is a little bit, I don't know, shorter, friendlier to me, but if you're a PowerShell person, I would definitely just use PowerShell. Yeah, there's nothing wrong with that.
And what language is Bicep written in? Do we know? That's a good question. Yeah.
I do not know. Do not know.
Good one.
But it's all open source. You ought to be able to go.
I see. Yeah. Someone can bingle that one for us and reply back.
Okay. So back over here. So we're still on our dev. Okay. So if we would have passed in the prod, we would have seen this change to GRS, but we did get our tags here. Okay. So you see our build code and our department, and made it onto here. So if we wanted to, I'm not going to deploy this again right now, just because it's not worth it but to deploy the prod, I would just do -p for parameter, and then I could say environment. So that's how you would deploy that as prod, and that would trigger the GRS. Now, another interesting thing. Okay, let's do this. I'm gonna skip out on that. Okay, actually, I'm gonna go back to here. Okay, so sometimes, we have several storage accounts over in that resource group now, right? Some people want their deployments, and imagine when you're deploying from a DevOps pipeline, right? You check in some code, and you had 3 storage accounts, but now you remove 2 of them for some reason from your code, right? Some people are of the opinion that, well, when I get ready to delete those, I'll just go manually delete them in the portal, and they want that safety of not accidentally deleting something. Other people want this template to totally kind of own and control that resource group, and so to get that, to have it actually delete things that aren't in this deployment, you can do dash mode complete. So by default, the mode is incremental, but you can make the mode be complete. That's right. And I'm also going to do a -c here. So that's a pretty important trick to know, but it takes a bit of responsibility to use that, because literally, if someone else went and created something not following your pipeline, their resources would get deleted, because basically it's going to delete everything that's not in this template. And keep in mind, these other resources that we've deployed, they're not really what this template is deploying right now, so they would get deleted, even though this template was used to deploy them, because they were deployed with different parameters. They will get deleted, so that you can see right there, it's going to delete that storage account, and the dash means delete, and the orange means delete. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and say yes and get rid of that other storage account. All right. So we're going to keep on improving this. Another thing we can do is we can start creating containers in our storage account. I don't know if you know what containers are. These aren't like Docker containers. These are kind of the top level folders that are in your storage account. So, and they have some properties you can set on them about how you want things to behave, security, and so forth. So way you would create one of those, you say resource, and then I'm going to call this is a blob service, so I'm going to call it BS, and then storage account. You can see right here, blob service. And again, I hit tab to get that latest API spec, and then required properties tab. I give it a name. So I'm just going to tell you that the name of this needs to be default. And if you want to know how I discovered that it needs to be default, it's because I deployed it with something else other than default, and I got an error message that told me it needs to be called default. So that's just a bit of knowledge. It is discoverable. It just takes you a second. And then you'll also see that I'm getting an error here. This is kind of a thing you'll see. It says expected resource contains to contain one slash character. The number of segments must match the number of segments in the resource type. So basically what's happening is this thing is a child of a storage account. It's not an object that really stands on its own. It's a child object. So if I wanted to, I could have come up here instead, and I could have said resource. I'm going to give it a different name so it doesn't conflict. And I could do blob services here. And you can see it doesn't give me the full Microsoft storage accounts, blah, blah. It just gives me that part, right? And then, and even the API it doesn't do because it's assuming you're going to use the same API as the parent, right? So I could do that here. And there's no problem with that. And it's telling me, okay, you're missing the one value name, and I could go fix that. It's just that kind of as the best practice, they tell you not to do too much nesting. Like you don't want to go too deep. And so kind of to show you that idea, I'm not going to nest this one, but I just want you to see there are kind of two different ways you can do child objects. So instead, I'm going to put the child here, but the way I tell this code that this is a child of this is by this property called parent. Okay, and I say parent is stg, which is this guy, the storage account, and that's what matches them up, and that's what resolves that thing. The other way I could do that is I could give it this longer name, and put default as a part of that longer multi-part name. So this is really the better approach. All right, so that's the first step to create a container, and now within the blob service, I'm going to create a container. So I'm going to do resource, here, and then storage accounts, and it's this guy here. I hit tab, equal, kind of you're starting to feel the pattern now, right? So this will be my container one, and then the parent, right? Parent is BS. Okay, so that should create a container in my storage account. So I'm going to go and deploy that. This time we'll deploy it with that that prod parameter. So if I do environment prod, and I'm going to forget to confirm. I'm just going to do it.
While that's deploying, Scott, we learned through some bingling on the folks here that C# is the language chosen. Apparently, this was written in. Thank you, everyone. And Andrew asks, does your reference to name conflict for BS when inside parent resource mean all names are at global scope?
That's a good question. Let's try it. I didn't really know if it were conflict. I was just being careful. Still just telling me it's the name. So far, it's not conflicting. This is a tricky one to experiment with, though, because I told you the name this name needs to be default, and it's not going to allow me to deploy two of those. If we got to a child later where we had two that could be created in each way, we could see what happens, but see if they conflict in any way. But at least the IntelliSense is not complaining about it. It does complain these two things are the same. I don't know. BS and BS are defined in the same file. Rename them or split them into different modules. Yeah, maybe that is a conflict right there.
Looks suspicious. You like it?
Yeah. Okay.
Today we learned.
Yep. I like it.
Thanks for the question, Andrew. Keep them coming.
All right, I'm going to go through my checklist and see if there's anything I'm supposed to tell you about that I left off. We have a lot more to go. I'm just looking at this page here. Output. So we can start working on our output. And we talked about outputs earlier. So if I say output, same type deal. I'm going to give it a name. So It's going to be a string equals, and this is what's interesting is I can go grab my storage account dot properties dot primary endpoints dot blob. Okay, so I'm grabbing a property, and you can grab properties off of the object that was created that weren't there, that weren't even available as inputs to the object. Some values only get created once the object is created, and then you can go grab those back. And so this output then means if I were calling this from another program or from another module or whatever, this can be passed back to my PowerShell or to my Azure CLI or to my DevOps pipeline. So that's the beauty of this. And then you can go beyond this. You can make objects you pass back that have a number of values, right? Or you can pass back an array of values. So, all right, that looks like that deployed. Let's go take a look at what we got. Now, the output didn't deploy because we haven't deployed that yet, but this other guy did. So remember earlier we did the complete, that deleted the other storage accounts. Now, if I go in here, and you'll see this blob service was that thing that we got back and we called it BS. And then if you go into the blob service, I did not have a container. All right, let's go take a look. What did I do?
You need to save the file.
Say it again.
A black dot.
Yes, thank you, black dot. See, that's why I have to train you guys so you can be my watcher. Okay.
All right, while that's deploying a second time, Scott.
Okay.
Another quick question. Bicep has the ternary operator, but a quick skim does not show a case expression or similar. So I assume the appropriate approach is arrays keyed by string values, etc.
Yes. I'm trying to think if, yeah, and I haven't even experimented with how deeply you could nest conditionals. That would be interesting. At some point, you may have to break things into multiple modules. All right, so that deployed. Let's go take a look. Back on there's our container one. All right. So helps when you save the file. All right. Let's then. Okay, so let's take this a little bit further. Now let's say instead of just one container, we want 3 containers. Okay, how would we do that without having to like hard code every one of them? So let's say I had a list of container names that I wanted to work with. So I'm going to go up here. I'm going to say var container names equal red. Each one gets their own line. Okay. These are this is an array. This other billing thing kind of threw me off. This is an object. This is an array. Okay. Array is the hard brackets. All right. So then down here, I can change this so that this thing expects to create an array of containers and not just a single container. And the way you do that is by putting a bracket here. There's brackets when you're dealing with arrays. So this whole thing gets wrapped in an array syntax. And then for here, I say for container in container name in container names. And container names just happens to be the name of my array. I could use anything I want. But this is going to be as it puts each one from this list is going to go into that and populate a singular container name and get passed on to my code. And then to complete this, I just put 1 colon behind here, and then what happens after the colon is what it's repeating over and over. And then one of the things it's going to tell me is that you need to kind of use this and make this thing unique. So instead of just hard coding the container, I'm going to call it the variable container name. Okay, now I could do container name and use that string interpolation to add some other information onto that or whatever, but this is a good start. So let's deploy this.
One question I don't think we've got an answer yet. How do you terminate a deployment, Scott?
I don't really know, because really, I mean, so there's probably a way to do it from the command line. If you come into the portal and you go into the resource group, you can see each of the deployments we've been making here. Okay, so if it was still running, it would show up with a little blue icon here, and I think you might be able to come here. Yeah, you could come here and hit
You can select
cancel.
it and click cancel.
Yeah. So that's one way. I imagine you could do the same thing from the CLI. I just don't. I haven't done that. No. One thing to note is if you're deploying lots of things via ARM or via Bicep, it's going to be deploying those resources in parallel. So if you go create 20 virtual machines, that's one of the great things about it is it's not creating them sequentially where it waits for one to complete before the other. And in fact, even the virtual machine, is really, when you deploy a virtual machine, it has a number of parts, right? It has a NIC, and it has a disk, and some different things that make up the virtual machine. It deploys all of those things in parallel as much as it can. If there's a dependency where it needs one thing before it can create the other, it knows that. But if there's no dependency, it goes in parallel. Okay. Can't remember.
Yeah,
Just
a quick follow-up question to that of terminating. Essentially, but isn't the idea, or like just asking for the best practice, I suppose with this would be before it's going to be deployed to production, like it would have ran like many times in dev and staging environment, so the recipe is almost perfect, right?
Correct. Yes.
Okay.
And that's really, a lot of people, their dev environment is really just such a playground that's what's really so great about having the staging or QA or test or whatever you want to call it, like, is to be able to actually test that migration from one stage to the next. And so, like, when you go to test, it should be kind of like you're testing that automation. And even if you go tear it down later, at least you have a really good feel for what it's going to be like to do a production deployment. Okay, so all our containers are there, and we also still have this other container. Just going to leave that. I'm not going to worry about it. All right. So then we could take this a step further. If we wanted to, this is where it gets into like code reuse. How would we, let's say this storage account deployment was like an important part of this much bigger deployment we wanted to do, and we wanted to maybe be able to reuse this part in multiple deployments. Different teams might want to use this, or maybe I want to call this whole template 5 times from some other deployment, right? So how do we do that? And that's how that's modules is the way you do that. So I'm going to make this thing that we've been working on be kind of our child from now on, and I'm going to call it from kind of a parent module. So I'm going to rename this to our storage Bicep. And then I'm going to create a new file that kind of becomes the top level file, and I'm going to call that main.bicep.
So Scott, Is this akin to nest or linked ARM templates?
It is, but it's a billion times easier. And this is like with the linked ARM templates, that is definitely a advanced ARM technique, and it's tricky and it's cumbersome. One of the things you had to do is you had to kind of upload the template somewhere, either into a storage account or use like a SAS token to get to it, or onto some public location. And that was very painful. This alleviates all of that. So let me just show you real quick. So the way you start to use a module. So one, I'm going to use this storage account Bicep as a module. I don't have to make a single change to it. There's nothing you do to the child to change it to become a module. It all happens up here. So I use the module syntax, module. I give it a module name. So this is be my store mod. How about that? And then it's going to prompt me for other files that are in that folder. So boom, equal, required properties. Okay, I need to pass in a name. So let's call this STG. Of course, I need it as a string. And then params. So remember, I didn't have any required params, so that's why it didn't prompt me for that. But if I had, and then I hit Control Space, and it's going to show me my list of params, and I just hit Tab, fill that in, and then I'm using prod. Okay, so this is me now, deploying this as a child. I can do things from here. So let's do that. So now notice here I'm still deploying main.bicep. I'm not deploying storage.bicep. Oh, yeah. So that makes sense. This thing doesn't know about the prod parameter, so I can't do that unless I created another parameter at this level.
But Scott, you can pass parameter values between the parent and child.
Yeah, that's what I'm doing right here. So this is where I'm passing those parameters to the child.
Oh, yeah. Sweet.
And there should also be a way to get the outputs back from the child too. I don't have that demo worked up, but
yeah, commonly required for like web apps or SQL servers when you want to know what IP addresses it came up with, so you can then whitelist them from whatever's else being built.
So again, you can see it deployed all these things, right? It's not really making a change because those things already exist, but my deployment succeeded. So keep in mind, I could deploy that thing again, and then I could even go further, and I could make an array of these things, right? So if I wanted to go in here and do that syntax we talked about earlier, where I say for, and I have a whole list of deployments, I could do that. I think I'm not going to do that because I want to go into some other things. But you can kind of keep on building on this thing, and that's where you can get to some really massive deployments using this technique. So one of the things I also wanted to show you is the idea. So let's go back to this. I'm going to go back to this one. And I wanted to show you some things about how, some benefits of working with this that are beyond some of the integration with the portal that makes it of value to be using Bicep and ARM. So I'm going to put a description here. I'm going to say this is single quotes. Okay, so I can say some nice things about the things I might do here. Okay, and then what I'm going to do is I am going to do the build. This is going to actually create an ARM template for me. Okay, so I'm going to say az bicep build -f, and this is okay. So you see my JSON file showed up here, right? I'm just going to use the same. And this is pretty interesting. See if I can do it side by side. There we go. So you can see how much more succinct the Bicep is than ARM. So here's the storage account. It's right here. And you can see like this syntax for this conditional, right? How much if parentheses equals parameters for environment. It's just a lot more cumbersome. You see how like the concatenation has the open bracket format. The IntelliSense for that is not nearly as good. And then you'll also see this kind of depends on idea. And this is something where when we do the parent, these things kind of link up to each other automatically. Whereas in ARM, you would have to actually kind of hard code which parts depend on which other parts so it knows how to build them in what order. So nice improvement. The thing I want to show about this, though, is I can go into the portal and I can go to a template spec. Okay. And then you can pick a scope that you want to make this available at. So I'm going to make this available to my subscription. And then I can import a template. And let's see. Oh, no, I'm not going to do it that way because I'm not on this computer. Create template spec. All right, so this is where I'm going to say put this in each US. I could put a description about what this template's for. I call this V1. Okay, you can see, and basically the idea is I'm creating a template so other people on my team can use it. Okay. Grab the all right, so I just paste over this. Next, I could put tags on this if I wanted to. Third information name. So this would be storage. As the red green. All right. Create. All right, so this is here in your portal. So now, and this has RBAC on it, so I can make this available to other people on my team, or I can make it to anyone in my organization. And then they can just come to this template spec whenever they want to deploy something and just click deploy. And they'll get this nice UI and it'll look like kind of a regular Azure product. They'll go create their resource group. So, and then pick their region. And you see like the dev test prod, those allow values that we did earlier now become a drop-down list in this UI. So they'll get the pick from the list. And then remember earlier, we gave the little nice description about what this was. If I mouse over that, I get that description. So then now you can start describing to your users, how they might want to use this. So I can just click on this and then deploy it from the portal. So now this isn't really infrastructure as code. This is kind of, this is people kind of ad hoc deploying things, but this is an example of some ways in which, because you use Bicep to get your work done, now you can take those assets and then make them available as a template spec.
So, hey, Scott,
yep.
Can a Bicep script be generated from an existing Azure resource in the portal?
Yes, let's do that. Okay, so, and this is another thing that's really important to know. So, okay, so you can take any, this is a VM. Just before we started today, I went and deployed this VM. Okay, this is just a very basic VM. But note that when you deploy a VM, it does deploy a public IP address, a NIC, a disk, and a virtual network, right? So I can go to this VM and I can say download template, or I can go to this resource group and I can say, it's export template. Okay, so it's right here, export template. So I'm going to do that. I'm going to take this whole template and I'm going to export it. Now this is an ARM template, so eventually I could see one day this being a Bicep, giving you the option to be a Bicep template, but today it's an ARM template. But that's okay. So I can go take this. I'm saving that. I'm going to say that VM from Portal. So this is now this is an ARM template. Okay. Now I happen to know, because I've gone through this, that there are a couple of these properties when it did the export that aren't needed for the import, and they end up giving me errors when I try to do them. And you would find out by just deploying it, and it would say, hey, I don't know what this is. see if I can find that. I think it's this. This one right here. And then I also need to supply a password. So when you export, and it kind of makes sense if you think about it, when you export a module or a template for a VM, it's not going to export the password of that VM. So what that is. It's admin password. Oh, and actually, I mean, I could have taken this template. I could have taken this template and brought it back to being Bicep if I wanted. I'm trying to think if that's what we're trying to get to. Yeah. We are. So let's do this. Before I start modifying this, I'm going to make this into Bicep. So what I'm going to do is AZ Bicep decompile. I tell it the file name, which is .vm from portal.json. Fingers crossed.
You haven't saved it.
Yeah, I hadn't saved it. I don't. I really didn't intend to make any changes there, so let me.
I think you might have left a comma after that
Yeah,
line you
so
deleted.
Where
you whacked.
I did. Okay, I did partially save it. You're right. Okay, so let's see. You think that was it, or do you see something else?
And the other one, the other line, I think you might have left hanging comma on there. Allow extensions on 112.
Yeah. All right.
That
so
one.
Good.
There you go.
Thank you. All right. So let's do that one more time. All right. So now we've gone back the other direction. Now you get the message here, right? Decompilation is a best effort process. There's no guaranteed mapping from ARM to JSON or ARM JSON to Bicep. So I can say that I've done it on a number of different ones. The ones that have failed kind of failed in a way where I could go in and kind of figure out how to fix it. You know what I'm saying? So it's not like it just didn't decompile. It would decompile, and then when I come over here, I'd have a couple little red things that show me where I have some problems. But I've had pretty good luck with it. So that's basically. And you think of this isn't where we started with a template of any sort, right? This is me manually going to the portal and deploying some things and then exporting that deployment from the portal. And so that's one of the beauties of working with kind of the native tools is they give you this round trip capability. So here I now have Bicep. I know I'm going to need this password, so I'm going to go ahead and add it. And password. I'm going to make a parameter up here. Bring in the password. So param password. And we've talked about a number of these different types here. You see there's one called secure string here, and it's not the same. It's not a type like one of the others, but if I choose that, it does something special for me. And let's watch what happens. So it really just becomes a string, but it has this secure attribute added to it, which makes it so that that value doesn't get logged, and things have to be passed in securely. So if you're using secrets, passing in secrets, you want to use a secure string. So now let's go try to deploy this thing. It's not going to be main Bicep. It's going to be Bicep. I probably should deploy it to a different. I'm going to change this to test, so it's a clean resource group that doesn't have other stuff in it. All right, let's see how it goes. Oh.
And while that goes, Scott, does Bicep have a simple way, like a command line parameter, to tear down a deployment rather than create it?
No, and some people consider that to be kind of an advantage of Terraform. For the most part, the easiest way to get around that, which works in 90% of the cases, but maybe not every case, is to use is just delete the resource group. So deleting the resource group deletes every resource in the resource group. So that's usually kind of how you want to decide about when to create a new resource group, is that a resource group is meant for items that have a similar lifetime. If you think you might be deleting this batch of things you're about to create, put it in a new resource group. All right, so we did get an error. Let's go take a look in the portal and see if we can figure it out. I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time on this. So I go to my deployment. I can go see where it failed right there. Let's go take a look and see. Okay, I remember running into this before. So this is a deal where when we exported that template, it included this property, and it is a property that's of that resource, but you don't need to supply that property when you create this thing. So basically, I just need to remove that property, which should be golden. So let me go try that. Manage disk, it's this. So this right here can just go away. And that's a property that gets created when it creates that disk. So let's try it one more time. How are we doing on time, Adam?
You still have a pretty full room here, Scott. So
all right, when people start
how much
fading
more you
off,
got to do?
Let me know. Yeah.
Are you gonna touch? We did have a question earlier around DevOps, and do you plan to touch upon that at all?
Yeah, I can.
All right.
So, do we want to go? I've got a couple different things I can show you. One, I can show you how to do a deployment with a key vault, which is often a very nice piece of this, is to be able to, instead of supplying the password at your command line, to just pass it a key vault that it has permission to and let it go grab the password out of the key vault. So that's one thing I can show you. The other would be to kind of go more into the DevOps piece and show you some things about that. Anyone have a preference there? We may have time to get to both. Depends on how deep we go.
I had a question about DevOps, so maybe do that first. And if folks need to drop, then we are recording this, and I will put the link to the recording, because that was a question we just had, in the Meetup. So the Meetup, there's a Q&A on the Meetup page itself for this Meetup, not the central one. I'll post the link there.
Yeah, and I'd like to provide some links, Adam.
Yes.
So I know everybody's going to want to know how to get started and some things, and I feel like I can provide some links to help people.
Yeah, maybe easiest if you put them in your deck, and we can post a PDF of your deck in there too. So we'll link the recording and the PDF of your deck, which you can put all those links in there perhaps.
Okay.
And if I can throw this question in there, because I might have to step away, if it's okay. Just jump in with a quick question. Yeah. So for somebody like me, we were discussing like some Azure newbies, knowing about like general DevOps, and like for me, I guess I just haven't focused on this side of the house, been more on other things, but I do have access to like Pluralsight courses and things like that. So if I wanted to get my feet wet and just get to incrementally learn more and get better at it, do you have any suggestions?
Yes, I do. I'll go ahead and, for your benefit, I'll go ahead and paste them in the chat now. Let me see. So the first is the So this is the actual Bicep project. And this, there's the intro video, tells you a lot of the things I told you about the goals and non-goals. But here's your installing your tooling. So not only do you need to install Bicep, you need to install that VS Code extension. This tells you all how to do that. Then it has a really great tutorial to walk you through. So that's kind of the first thing I would do to get started with this. The second, and I'll paste this in chat. Second is Microsoft Learn. There's an excellent Microsoft Learn class on this. Let me paste a link to that. And that is here. Here. I'll show you guys. So this is a whole kind of module. So this is 4 hours and 37 minutes worth of content. It's not videos, but you're actually doing deployments. It gives you a command line. You're going after it. And it's telling you all these things like child deployments. And I kind of thought I'd run through this just to kind of brush up to see if they're, because usually these things are so easy that I don't really think that it adds much depth, but I learned some things when I went through this. So I was actually really nicely surprised. So I would definitely say this is worth your time. So that's what I would spend my time on. I don't think that you're going to find many Pluralsight courses or anything. This is all probably too new at this point, and it's changing so fast that making video is probably not the best way to deliver this. So I think this is the way to go. Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
That's awesome. Yeah.
Excellent.
Thanks for sharing.
Excellent. Very good. So yeah, our resources deployed. So think about what we did there. We went over, we deployed some things to the Azure portal, and then we said, hey, how do we get that back into Bicep? We went down, we went to export template. We took that exported template and we decompiled it into Bicep. Then we took and deployed that Bicep back to Azure as another deployment. So that round trip capability that's something unique to Bicep, or to the ARM and Bicep. So all right. So you want to talk about DevOps. So this is my big tip on DevOps, period. This isn't specific to Bicep, but this is how to quickly get into DevOps, particularly if you haven't spent a lot of time with it, is to come into the Azure portal. You just type in DevOps and you go create yourself a DevOps starter. Okay. I love this. So DevOps starter is saying, okay, one, this technology, this starters work for GitHub, but you can also use Azure DevOps. So your choice. I would say if you have to choose, if you haven't really spent much time with either, the future is probably more towards GitHub. But a lot of people have a lot of investments in Azure DevOps as well, and it's going to continue to be supported for a long time. I'm going to choose DevOps in this case because there happens to be a feature in here that I want to take advantage of that's only available in Azure DevOps. Okay, so then it's going to ask you what programming language you're working with, and if you're an infrastructure person, and you may not really even care because you're trying to figure out how to deploy the code in a whole pipeline, but pick one. .NET is a very popular approach, right? So .NET, my dog, his friend must be passing by. And then within .NET, there's ASP.NET and there's ASP.NET Core. .NET Core is the newer approach. It's cross-platform, so I would go with that. And then where do you want to deploy this? And look at these options, right? You've got an Azure function, a web app for containers, virtual machine. I mean, like somebody getting a working DevOps pipeline end to end with infrastructure as code, with application code, working and deploying on day one is amazing, because that's what happens. A lot of people, like, they'll get part of it done, but they're not able to connect all the dots. And this gets you, immediately with all the dots connected, and then you can kind of work backwards from there to make it your own. Okay, so in this case, I'll say virtual machine. A lot of people have legacy things. You have a virtual machine you want to deploy your app onto. This is it, right? So I've already deployed one of these. This will take too long for me to do right now, but I've deployed one, and I can go show you what that looks like. So even when you go to deploy the virtual machine, you get to choose what VM size, but you're only given a couple things here. What's the project name going to be? What's your Azure DevOps organization? If you haven't already created one of those, you probably need to create that first. Just go into Azure DevOps to do that. And then your virtual machine name. So So that's it. I'm going to show you now in Azure DevOps what that looks like. So if I go to dev.azure.com, okay, Azure Meetup. Okay. And so this is what it does for you. It doesn't deploy directly anything. It's creating a repo of code for you, right? With ARM templates in it. Now these are ARM templates. It's not Bicep, but we know how to get back and forth between ARM and Bicep, right? So there's your ARM template, and this is your application code. This is like the website that it's going to deploy. Okay. So that's just the code. You can check out that code. You know, you can go, if I go click on this clone right here, I can say, how do I check this out? I go clone it in Visual Studio Code, or I can do it in Visual Studio. Either way, both will work great. I usually get credentials first. Okay, so that's the code. The pipeline, this is where the magic is. This is the classic approach, right? So there are two different approaches in Azure DevOps to deploying. One's the classic pipelines, and one's the YAML pipelines. Underneath the covers, they're both YAML. The YAML's the newer approach, and it has some advantages, mostly because your YAML that defines your automation is in your source control, so that when you make a copy of that, you clone it, you fork it, or whatever, you also get the forked pipeline. But for showing people and getting familiar, I really like the classic because it's just easier for people to understand. So that's what I'm showing you today. So here's my pipeline. If I go into this and I hit edit, I can see the steps it's doing. Okay. So it's doing, think of this as going to run on a build agent, right? Which is, think of this as a VM that's running in Azure that you never see, that does your build for you. And if you're doing pure infrastructure as code, you may not even need to do the build. Most of this build is about, building your application, but it does kind of like stash away your ARM templates, and you could also do your Bicep templates for use later, because you may want to deploy those to multiple environments. You may want to deploy to dev, then test, and production using the same artifacts. So basically, this is all running these different steps: restore, build, test your code, publishes the output, copies your ARM templates to certain locations, and then in the end, it does this publish artifact. And this kind of stuffs everything aside, and you'll have build one, and it will have all your artifacts, including your ARM templates and so forth, kind of tucked away, so that as you move things through the pipeline to different environments, you're taking the same artifacts and moving those through the environments. The same thing that you tested in dev is what get deployed to test, and which gets deployed to production. Okay. So that's the build step. If you're using YAML pipelines, the build and the release can be all kind of one thing. In this classic environment, it's broken into two pieces. So that was the build. Now we're going to go to the release. The release is probably the more interesting part. If I go edit my release, I get something that looks like this. So it takes the drop, and the drop is the output from the build. And in fact, this thing can automatically trigger. That's what they call this continuous deployment trigger. Whenever there's a new build, hey, let's trigger the release. And you can say, no, I don't want it to go to production without me approving. Well, you go put these people in here that are approvers, right? You can like add a person here that has to approve before it gets put to, maybe not dev, but maybe production. Or you can do other deployment gates. You can say, hey, I want to actually make sure that this thing runs in stage and has this level of performance before I'm able to move it to production. So all these different things you can do to make yourself comfortable. But here are the steps. This step right here is all about deploying an ARM template. So in the case of this one, it's going to deploy that ARM template. That ARM template is just a VM ARM template, similar to the one we deployed earlier. And it's going to pass in these different parameters to the ARM template. And they're kind of hard-coded here. Usually I would stick them up in these variables, but that's okay. I mean, the key one, the one that's actually a secret, is this one called VM password. And you see they use the syntax as $, open parentheses, VM password, and close parentheses. That tells you they're passing in a variable. And they do that because they don't want to like hard code the password right here for everyone to see. So if I go up here in my variables, you'll see the VM passwords here. And even if I do that, it won't allow me to see it. Like it won't let me get back to it. So that's great. You can also do these variable groups that can be reused among different pipelines. It's kind of a more advanced thing, but you can attach those to key vaults, and so that's a probably more secure way of securing your secrets. All right, so here's my deal. This is my dev environment. It has these steps, does this ARM template that creates the VM, and then what it does is it installs this agent on that VM that makes these VMs part of a deployment group. And a deployment group is this thing where all those VMs report under the certain name. Let's see if I can define it. The deployment group will be called this. So later on, when I go to do things to these VMs, I don't have to do them for each VM. Say this was a load balance set of 3 VMs in a load balancer. I wouldn't have to go deploy my application to each VM one after the other. I just deploy my application to the deployment group, and it does it for all of those VMs. And so that's the beauty of that, is that it's automatically making these VMs into a deployment group by deploying this agent and having them report back to the Azure DevOps portal. And these are the steps that I want to run on the deployment group. And the first one is called create a website. And this actually, we talked about earlier when you're actually configuring things inside of your VM, that's really more configuration as code instead of infrastructure as code. But that's kind of what this is. So this step, we talked about a number of those things like Chef and Puppet and Ansible. This right here actually uses WinRM and basically does that stuff for you. Actually installs certificates, does all your bindings, basically does most of your IIS configuration. Then right here is deploy the website. So earlier in that build step, we build our website and we packaged it up in a zip folder. And this thing knows how to take a zipped up website and deploy it to the web server. So you're done. I mean, you've got an end-to-end pipeline that builds and configures your web server, deploys the web app onto it, and you're done. So let's tie that a little bit more closely to what we're doing here. I took the same one. Let's see. I'm gonna go back here. I'm gonna find, this is Asdo 2. I'm gonna go to Asdo, which is the first one I created, and I customized this one to be more pertinent to what we're doing here. So from a pipeline, I went into the pipeline and I edited it, and we remember we had the copy ARM templates. Takes all of the so it takes all of the ARM templates folder and copy those to that staging directory. This one takes everything in the Bicep folder and copies it to the staging directory. Okay, the staging directory is the place where things get packaged up by this published artifact directory. So this path to publish is the staging directory. So, and this becomes the drop. You remember, which are the things we set aside that can be moved to the different environments. So basically, all I did is add this extra step that copies my ARM template, my Bicep templates into that. And then for the release aspect, let's go into that release. So this is another idea here, is that you're kind of getting the full picture, right? Like, so this shouldn't just deploy you to dev. You should deploy to dev, and if all goes well, it should deploy to test. And usually what I do is I make this automatically deploy to test, but then have some kind of approval here so it stops. So once I'm happy with the way things are in dev, I go click a button and it just deploys onto test. And when people are happy with that, deploys to prod. Or you may abandon this one halfway through and never, you do another build and you want to start using that build. So right here, let's go take a look at what we've got. Now, I disabled this ARM template. I really shouldn't have had to do that. I was just trying to be faster because I'm trying to get my own thing going here. But I've basically, there isn't currently a step yet that's custom to Bicep. So basically, we're having to do the same stuff we did at the command line earlier here in an automated fashion. But you think about, this is what I did. And in fact, I don't even know that I need to do these Bicep install versions, because if you look at it, I'm not even using a Bicep command. I'm using the AZ deployment group create command, which isn't even Bicep. You know, that's not even a Bicep command. That's just an Azure CLI command. And there's a corresponding PowerShell command. So if you like PowerShell, it's the same PowerShell command that takes to deploy a Bicep template or an ARM template. And then the other thing I'm doing here is I'm creating the resource group. And you can see I created a resource group called Azure Meetup ASDO dash, and then I have same idea dash $ environment. So I have a dev, a test, a prod environment, and I'm using the same script in all three environments and passing in this variable so that I'm creating a resource group based on the environment name. And then when I go do my deployment, I also pass that environment name to my deployment. Okay. Then I have to do this little dash env here, which in my parameter here, I named my parameter env. And so this little thing is how I get the environment, which is one of my variables up here at the top, passed into this little script. Okay, and I can show you those variables. That'll probably help you understand. Okay, so my variables here, I have my VM password, and I'm using the same VM password across all environments. Is that a bad practice? Probably, but that's what I've done here. But you can see that these other variables, I've made the scope of this value just be for dev. So I have the environment variable 3 times, one for dev, test, and prod, and I happen to have just put the values of dev, test, and prod in those. You know, you can also have a VM password for dev, test, and prod and have a different value for each, right? So that's what's really slick. And you kind of, when you're building your Bicep templates, you kind of want to be thinking about how you're going to be using that template when you deploy it. Because if you really try to do something where you're creating dev, test, and prod in the template itself, then you can't really use this pipeline approach. All right, so let me take a look, see if there's anything else I want to show you about this. That's really it. Does anyone have any questions on how this works or what we're doing here?
Thank you for saving me so much time.
Awesome, great.
One question, Scott, I think was, is there equivalent to some of this in GitHub Actions?
Yes. Okay, so you know, one back there when we started this at DevOps starter, right? We could have created a starter with a GitHub action. In fact, the default when you come in here is a GitHub one. So the only thing about the GitHub action one is if I go to the same choices, I don't have as many choices here. I don't have one for virtual machine. So I can create a web app, but the one for virtual machine. Now, really, if you think about what we did with Bicep there, the Bicep was really just a script. And I do have the ways to deploy Bicep using from, I showed you my ways, okay? Now I'm going to show you what the documentation gives us, which you might also appreciate. I'm going to post those in the chat. Why is it not sending? All right, try that. So even with the Azure DevOps pipelines, there are instructions here, and these instructions for Azure DevOps are great. There's nothing wrong with them. These rely on the YAML pipelines, which is great. And probably when you do this for real, you probably eventually want to get over to a YAML pipeline. It's the better long-term approach. But if you're learning, I think they're both good, you know. So, you know, here's how to do it if you like Azure CLI. Here's how to do it if you like PowerShell. Either your choice, no worries, you know. And then copy and deploy tasks. So this is the whole step-by-step of how you want to do that with Azure DevOps pipelines. They're a little bit different than the approach I took, but same idea, should work. Same idea, they also give you the same thing for GitHub Actions. And like I said, GitHub's Actions, if you haven't really started with Azure DevOps or GitHub, GitHub's probably the better approach. I mean, it has a lot more investment behind it. You can see their approach is quite a bit more simple there. So, check them out, see what you think.
Thanks, Scott. No other questions in the chat?
A/B testing, canary deployments. Yeah, that would be another good. That'd be another good session. Yeah.
Yeah, I didn't ask you those because
Okay.
Another
how
time.
are we doing on time? Do we want to do the key vault thing? That would be my last little piece.
Sure. Well, we're over,
Okay.
But
all right.
We have a few folks had to drop, Scott. But
okay.
we still got a small room full here.
Mm-hmm.
So if you don't mind giving up the rest a little more of your time, if you please finish the content you had prepared. And
sure.
if people need to drop, then thank you for joining. You can perhaps catch the recording. Otherwise, please go ahead, Scott. This is interesting.
Excellent. Okay. All right, let's get back to that. So let's do this. I'm gonna create another resource type, and this is so resource. This is going to be a SQL resource. I need to save this as a Bicep file so it knows how to do my IntelliSense. So I'm going to call this SQL.bicep. And then I say SQL. And this is going to be a SQL server. This is our PaaS SQL service. I'm not creating the whole database because I'm just trying to get to something simple that needs a password. So I'm going to this. So this is the SQL. Actually, I'm going to use another thing else. This is pretty interesting. I can't remember if I showed you guys this already. So this would be something like SQL, and I can do $, unique ID, unique string. Okay, so unique string. So a lot of times you don't want to have to name everything, right? You're creating a bunch of resources and you want to just come up with a random name for you. The deal is if you use a truly random name, every time you deploy it, you'd get a different value. And of course, now it'd be making an extra copy of the thing. So that's not going to work. What this unique string does is it takes in a seed value. So if I take the seed value as being resource group ID, and realize the resource group ID is going to be the fully qualified path to your resource group, including your subscription name, resource group name. It's going to come up with a unique value that's unique to that resource group. So it's a way of coming up with a unique value that is going to be repeatable. Every time I deploy it, I'm going to get the same value back. Okay. I'm going to go with I'm going to resource group and should be able to just deploy this right here. Oh, I know it's going to ask me for these administrator login, admin, administrator password. I'm going to call this SQL password. Okay, make that a parameter. Param SQL password string. Yeah. Okay. All right. So I think we can deploy this right here. AZ deployment. Creating a deployment. Group gate -f. All right. Dash resource group. So dash b rg underscore bicep dash dev. See how that goes. Not sure why it's showing that. It's interesting. It may not even accept that from the command line. So if it fails, that's fine. I'm wanting to make this be our deployment, and we're going to pass a value from a key vault to this, right? So I think this is close enough that this would deploy successfully. And what we're going to try to do is pass in this value, but pass it from a key vault, okay? And I'm going to do that from another module. So I'm going to say, I'm going to create a new file. And then resource, KV for key vault, vaults, tab. And then this is a new keyword that we haven't talked about before, existing. So this is not creating a resource. This is going out and finding an existing resource, okay? Existing equals required properties. So now I'm going to go, I've already provisioned a key vault earlier. And this kind of makes sense, right? Because normally your key vault's probably not going to be a part of your DevOps process. If it is, it's kind of a standalone process to provision that. You might use a script to deploy it. So here's my shared location, and that's my key vault. And one of the things I'll also show you, if I go to access control, sorry, it's in policies. Where's access policies? You basically need to check this checkbox to allow ARM template deployment. Okay, so that allows the ARM process to come in and grab values from this. And you can also do that from the command line. You want to deploy this key vault from the command line. So anyway, here's my key vault name. I'm gonna use that as my name back over my template. So name. Then there's another thing you need here called scope. And basically it's saying, where should I look for this thing? So I'm going to say, look in a resource group. And if I kind of hit arrow down on this, there's a number of different, options here. So that would be a resource group. This is, you don't even have to do this if this key vault were in the same resource group that what you're deploying to. But in my case, this is a different resource group from where I'm deploying. I think what I did in the past is I actually used this one where I supplied the subscription. Actually, I'm thinking really all I need to do is this one right here, where I supply the name since it's in the same subscription. But I think you would, if you needed to deploy to a different subscription, you would just use a different, you would supply the subscription and the resource group. In my case, I'm just going to supply the resource group. Find the resource group name, which was the shared. Okay, so that's my key vault. And then here I'm going to do module SQL mod, and there's my SQL equal required properties. SQL and then my password is going to be key vault dot, and there's a kind of a function you can call on there to get the secret. And I have to tell it the name of that secret. So let's go back to the key vault and take a look and see what my secret name was. Here are my secrets. And realize you can put this secret into here by just creating one right here. And this is, the secret is my password, right? Is my password that I want to use for SQL. And it's called admin password. So back over here, admin password. Okay. So basically it's going to call my SQL module, and it's going to pass in as the SQL password to that module a value it got from the key vault. And it got the secret named called admin password. So let's see how this goes. So this one's called Vault.
I don't know about anyone else on the call, Scott, but I'm obsessively checking for that black dot every time you click that button right there.
Good for you. It may fail, and the reason why is when I deployed last time, I'm trying to remember. I can't remember if I deployed to dev or not. If I deployed to a different resource group, it might tell me that I've already got a server by that name. And I guess it's a little bit cheating if that server already exists. So I could delete it, but back there. So that's the server. Yeah, and it did get that random name we put in there, right? And that random name is going to be the same every time. So actually what we should do is just deploy it to another. I don't want to take the time to delete that one. I'm going to deploy it to another resource group. Let's go to our test resource group. That has a virtual machine. Our prod resource group is empty. I'm going to deploy it to prod, straight to prod. Okay, so that deployed successfully. I'm going to try doing the same thing just to make sure everybody trusts me. And that's how easy it is to make a second deployment to another resource group. All right. So I think that's about all I had to cover. Don't have any questions?
No other questions in the
Anyone
chat.
left?
Yeah, there's a small room full.
The toughest.
Glued eyeball. That's right. The hardcore.
Yes. Yes. All right.
Any questions from anyone still left on the call?
All right. Very good.
Got a thumbs up from Henry. Thank you, Henry.
Okay. All right. All right. So yeah, next couple of days we'll get some links out. I'll post the presentation, and that's all I had for you.
Okay. Well, awesome. Then we'll close it out. Many thanks for this. Oops. Oh, just clicked. All right. Many thanks for that, Scott. Really appreciate your time, particularly giving up your time, escaping, pulling away from your family here here in Houston on a Thursday night. Many thanks for that. Many thanks to everyone for joining in and for all the questions. Great to see you all as well. So I'll stop the recording. I'll stay around for a few more minutes if you want to chat, but I'll say thank you for everyone, and I'll stop the recording right now, which I'll post on the Meetup shortly.